Hi, my name is Amina Jennifer. Today I'm gonna do my makeup and I'm going to express my heart's truth and align. That's pretty much it. Let's get started. I think in some way, everyone with a heart has a calling as an instrument, a calling that requires them to be used as a vessel for their heart. I think in some way, everyone in the universe shares a singular purpose. And I think in many ways, sort of answering the calling of allowing your heart to use you as a vessel, to use you as an instrument, right? To sing your truth, I think is what almost reveals that shared purpose between all. So I have this stream of thought, okay? It's like flowing in infinite directions. So I'm just gonna start at the beginning. Earlier, I was kind of thinking about suicide prevention, right? And like mental health awareness and just having a really introspective moment with my most high self to really think about like what is a sort of a universal path that as a collective we can sort of walk in order to prevent self-destruction. So I began to sort of think about what self-destructive habits and self-destructive tendencies that are shared globally. Like that as a collective, we all do this thing or these things, think these thoughts, act these ways that ultimately create a space for a lack of mental strength that allows us to heal. I'm gonna get very imaginative, okay? Think of me as like your imaginary friend, okay? Like the voice in your head that just somehow has a human body. And like it's just me and you, right? Only us in the world. I was having this conversation, right, earlier, okay? Just like stay with me, okay? Stay with me. I'm telling you, I'm gonna get very, very much so imaginary friend with you. And I just need you to not like be afraid of the unknown, all right? I was having a conversation with this guy earlier, right? And his name was Suicide. Like that was his name. And he was telling me his life story, kind of, okay? Because like I said, think of me like being that imaginary friend in your head, right? And this story is kind of taking place in the imagination, like in a parallel universe somewhere, okay? I was having a conversation with this guy, right? We were talking, and his name was Suicide, okay? And he was telling me his life story. Because I was kind of asking him, like, how do we stop the world from doing these self-destructive, low vibrational actions, having these self-destructive, low vibrational thoughts? Like, how do we prevent them from being you? How do we prevent the world from living right like you? And so he starts talking to me. He sort of starts like telling me that like he found this girl, right? And so remember, his name is Suicide, and he was telling me that he found this girl and her name was Happiness. Her name was Happiness, okay? And he was telling me that like they were soulmates and they were like true love and all of this. Okay, like he's telling me how like as soon as they met, it was just like two peas in a pod. And I was like, how so? You know, like she's so different from you. I'm like, what? How can you be in love, Mr. Suicide? Like, what's up? What's the secret? So then I start looking at like somehow she appeared into the conversation, right? Happiness, which was his lover. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, girl, like, how you love that man? Like, he's literally your complete opposite. Like, you're light, he's dark. You're life, he's death. What's up? Like, what's going on, sis? And she starts telling me like they share the same love language. And I'm like, keep going. And she starts saying how like, you know, the way she expresses her love is through happy thoughts. Like she can only say things like about world peace, and she can only say things about like being joyful and free-spirited and spreading positivity. Like that's the only way she can express her love, right? And she said there came a time where like she started experiencing a really rough patch in her life because everyone would always praise her for being happy, but nobody really understood that like even though all she could express was like positive thoughts and peace and like unity, she didn't always feel like love. But she couldn't help it. She didn't love herself. Nobody could ever see past the fact that like she didn't feel like anybody understood what she was saying, because all they could hear, all they could perceive was the fact that she was saying happy thoughts and happy things, but not realizing that that's all she can do because she's happiness. And just because she's saying that she is happy, you know, and that she's spreading all this good energy doesn't mean that she feels love or that she feels understood. And so she started to feel like she was talking to a brick wall with like everyone in her life. She felt like no one could like understand the true meaning behind her happy thoughts. She wasn't trying to be praised, or you know, it's like she wasn't trying to achieve anything. She was only ever trying to express herself, but the only language that she knows is happiness, right? And so she said when she found Suicide, okay, she found him, and it was the first time she had ever like heard someone express the same language of love, which was like true to the nature of their heart. And so she said like he was always alone, you know, because nobody would ever want to talk to him, and she would always wonder why. Until she finally sat down and had a conversation with him, and she realized that all he could express was darkness. All he could say was sad things. All he could talk about was like destruction and self-harm and all those things, right? But it was a moment of, I want to say like reflection, where for him it was the first time that he realized somebody could like hear that even though the only way he could express himself was through these seemingly dark, sad, and like depressive thoughts, somehow when like she heard him, she was able to decipher through it all and hear like love. And he was the first person that ever heard her express and realized that she didn't feel love, because he could decipher her thoughts like and hear like the truth and not just the way it sounds, you know. So it was like they finally met someone who could like see them, you know, who could see really who they were. And for her, it's like interesting because his self-expression was actually the way that she felt. All these dark thoughts and this sadness and this self-destruction, that's how she felt inside. But nobody could ever like hear or see her see that, because the only way she could express herself was through happiness. Like him expressing himself and doing that in a way that was true to his heart allowed her to feel loved, because she could finally meet someone who was able to create an experience for her that really felt like love, you know, because it was like his heart was able to speak to her truth and give her sort of a voice, and her saying her truth, right? Vice versa. It's like he always genuinely felt happy and he was so in love with life and in love with himself and everything, but he could only express, the only language that he was able to speak was through dark thoughts and self-harm thoughts and all those things. And so nobody could ever really perceive, and people always feared him. People always thought he was dangerous. But in reality, he was in love with everyone and everything, you know. He was in love with life, he was in love with himself, but he always ended up being like ostracized because people only heard what they wanted to hear. And so I was like, wow, what a love story you guys have. And I think like the whole purpose to me was that everyone's mind has infinite personalities, because we live in a universe where there are infinite personalities, right? So these personalities don't just stay in one individual reality. They swarm through every reality, and these personalities are our emotions, right? They are happiness. That's a personality. And when you express yourself when you're happy is only like in a linear way, like, and then there's sadness. When you express yourself when you're sad, it's a linear way. When you're suicidal, you express yourself in a suicidal way, linear. When you're excited, when you're angry, when you're sad, when you're confused, right? All of these different personalities come with an entire language, with a set of thought patterns that allow that emotion, that allow that personality of our mind, right, to really express the way it sees the world. And I think for me, one of the most high truths is that we don't have control over our emotions. We really don't, you know. If you try to control your emotions, you'll just end up kind of creating this sense of mental disorder, because there will be so much of yourself that you're trying to keep inside of a box, but your emotions won't let you stay in that one box. It always flows from happy to sad to confused to calm to angry. And it may not go that instant, but like, let's say you have a time in your life where your personality is like happiness, and then there comes a time where all of a sudden you're sad, and then there comes a time where you're upset all the time. There comes a time where you're like suicidal, and then a moment where you feel free. And you know, kind of looking at yourself from the outside looking in, You know, you may look at your life, or someone could look at your life and judge you and be like, oh, that person is crazy. That person is bipolar. They don't know who they are. Their personality is all over the place. 1 second they're this, 1 second they're that. And, you know, but not realizing that even the people who have the most, like, strict way of expressing who they are, even the people that intend and are capable of expressing a singular sort of personality type, still experience emotions that alter who they are and alter the way their thoughts express and alter the way their heart feels and all of those things. And I think that when I sort of like took a moment to reflect on that story, that love story between suicide and happiness, right? And thought about the fact that, like, that's it. Like, that's that one collective sort of habit that the world shares, right? That the brain does, is that it judges the way its personality is expressed based on its emotional state, right? Like, it judges the mind and the thoughts based on the emotional state of being, and decides to determine whether that personality is good or bad, whether those thoughts and that emotion right together when they create this sort of personality, the expression of the personality, whether that experience, they judge it. And when they do that, right, it creates, I want to say, like, this false sense of God, you know, this false sense of like a force in the universe that is capable of self-destruction. Because as soon as you experience those like happiness, those like happy thoughts, right, and you move and you act based on those happy thoughts, and you attach yourself to what your personality is like in that moment, right? And you create this false sense of, like, again, identity, that this is who you are, and that these thoughts are true to, like, your heart. And then there comes this moment where you're experiencing suicidal thoughts, right? And then you do the same thing. You start to attach this to, like, your identity and your personality, and when it starts thinking these like dark thoughts and these depressive things and these self-destructive sort of thought patterns, you start to attach your personality to it. You start to kind of claim it as who you are. And I think this is like why people act on self-destructive thought patterns, because they view it as more than just a language of the universe. But if you start to try to interpret this language, right, that's when that disorder comes, that miscommunication happens. That's what I was saying. Like, let's say you speak English, right, and then you meet somebody who comes up to you and they start talking in Chinese. You're looking at them and the way that they're expressing themselves, and you're like listening to them, and immediately you take offense. You start getting defensive because you think that they're talking about you and that they're threatening to kill you, and like they're this dangerous force because they're talking to you and they don't know, and you have no idea what they're saying. So you just immediately assume that, like, oh, this person wants to kill me, this person is crazy. So you start maybe like retaliating, you start acting towards them, and you start like immediately fighting them and like beating them up and like doing all this, and the police show up, right? and let's say the entire thing was like caught on camera and like the like audio was clear, and when the police watched the like video they watched the video back, right, and they have a translator, and it turns out that entire time that person was saying how much they love your outfit, how beautiful that they think you are, and they never seen somebody with like such grace and such poise and like all this, and then all of a sudden you just start beating them up. But in the moment, right, you perceived them to be a threat to you, a danger, so you started to self-destruct. You started to like fight them and act in ways that like reflect the way you perceived what they were saying, right? You thought that they wanted to destroy you. You thought that they were trying to kill you, so you did exactly what you thought they were trying to do to you. And you created this force of like darkness, all because you decided to judge someone's love language, their language, right? Which is the only way that they knew how to express love. And you took it, okay? And you created your own force in your head that this person's language and the love that they were expressing using this language, right, was evil, dark. And the entire time, that's the only language that they've ever known, and it's the only way that their brain knows how to communicate. But the message that they were sending was love. It's the same thing with your emotions. Every time you're presented with a state of being, a state of mind, right? Let's say you're happy and your mind starts spitting out happy thoughts to you, right? And you start interpreting this language as like, oh my gosh, this is love, right? Because apparently somehow you can interpret it, you can translate it, okay? Then let's say you meet the version of you that's sad. They start expressing their thoughts and their like personality, and somehow you start interpreting their language differently compared to the way happiness was expressing love. But because sadness is using a different language, right? It has sad thoughts. It has sad feelings. And that's the only language that it knows is sadness. But if you decide to judge that language, right, you could potentially self-destruct because you were missing the fact that they were expressing love, right? That your heart, that your brain, your mind, your world was expressing love from a different language. When you're angry with yourself, the same thing. They start spitting out all these like thoughts at you, and you're like, my mind is so angry with me, like what the heck? But if you were to get a universal translator, those thoughts would be equivalent to the frequency of love vibrationally. It is only the human, right? The judgment of the human that takes the universal language, right? These like infinite languages that exist in the form of emotion. Take those thought patterns and decides to decipher it and put its own meaning. Emotions, right, are love, but they all have their own language. Just like human beings are love, but we all somehow have our own language. It's the same, right? The dysfunction and the disharmony comes when You experience these different languages, and because you don't understand them, you automatically assume that they're not love. You experience all these different emotions, and just because you don't understand them, you automatically assume they're not love. From your heart, from the Most High. It's a much more expansive sort of like perception of your ability to be infinite, your personality to be universal, to be in alignment with this concept of a universe, this concept of unity, this concept of oneness, of being able to experience all these different personality types, all these different emotional states, all these different mind states, all these different thought patterns, and still perceive it to be love in the world, right? You experience all these different personality types, all these different languages, all these different cultures, and still be able to perceive it to be love. So I was thinking about like the universal thought patterns of suicide, right? And how like when everybody experiences this personality in their mind, you know, like I said, infinite personality types in the universe, and we all share collective mind. So these personalities aren't just, you know, like I said, confined to a singular being, just like how emotions aren't confined to a singular being. Everyone feels emotions, everyone feels happiness, everyone feels sadness, everyone feels anger, everyone feels all these things, right? And these personalities show up in everyone's mind and start spitting out thoughts. Like I said, if happiness didn't have suicide to experience as a reflection, she wouldn't have understood the value of her own life, because all her life people would have just been praising her happy thoughts, but never perceiving that she didn't feel loved, because people always interpreted what she was saying as happiness. So she never felt heard, she never felt seen. And then she meets this guy and he's spitting back to her exactly how she feels, and she's spitting to him how he feels. And I think the point is that they never judged each other's personalities, they never judged the thoughts, they never judged the way that they each expressed themselves, but they saw a heart. Instead of just listening and deciphering the language they were using, they decided to perceive that person as a reflection and gave them an opportunity to kind of express who they were. Okay, without judging their thought patterns. That power just went out. Oh. Instead of assuming that suicide was this dangerous guy who just wanted to harm himself and destroy everyone and everything because that was his only language, she gave her heart the opportunity to be open and gave him a space where the vibration of his voice could resonate, and she could listen to how he felt, and letting the frequency of his voice vibrate through her heart and reveal his truth. So that was my story time, and this is the end.